Thank you, everyone. Critically recording, yeah. All right. So yeah, we had a few technical problems, but I think we're pretty much sorted now. So hopefully, but remote people will let us know if there's any problems. So thank you all for coming to our kind of next Wellrailed meetup. All things. So this one's obviously at Flick. What else did I have to say here? I think that's really it. So yeah, thanks you all for coming. Elspeth's going to do some venue stuff.
Yeah, welcome to Flick. You're on level 1. There's another level. But this is where we're going to be today. The bathrooms, if you just go out the door there, they're in the hallway if you turn right as you leave the door. And if there is a fire, we will use the stairs and meet outside Bat's Theatre. There's also a fire extinguisher under that table over there if you need it.
Oh.
Is any questions?
I was looking to remote people, but they probably aren't as concerned about health and safety as we are in the room, so that's cool. All right, so the plan is we've got 2 talks. So the first is about advanced SQL queries in Rails from Eoin, and then we've got DORA and the developer experience, which is a really cool name from Elspeth. Then we've got a bit of a Flick Electric Q&A, so you'll be able to ask any questions you've got for people from Flick. And you've also, when you RSVP, there were some questions on there, so we've got those as well. Then we'll go through some job openings. So if you're hiring, please offer that something there. That'd be cool. And then hopefully it'll all be timed perfectly for pizza. So that'll be a really exciting part. Well, it's all exciting. But anyway, so yeah, I think, yeah, should we get into it? Eoin's talk.
Cool. I had enough time to create these slides, but not really learn them. So as we change slides, we'll all be excited about what turns up next, to be honest. So I'm going to talk about advanced SQL in Rails, and yeah, this will mostly be just Rails stuff, so it'll apply if you do MySQL as well. But there are a few bits where I get into Postgres because that's what I know. So obligatory stuff. Yeah, I've been doing Rails a while. Work at Ackama, been there a while as well. I've worked with a number of you there or through there. Yeah, we're hiring, of course we are. Let's crack on. Okay, so I had some time off over winter and I wanted to kind of dig into this. So I have started creating, like, I've got notes for this talk that go into depth on this, in more depth than we can do tonight. They are still a pretty work in progress and a bit chaotic, but if you need to reference something, you might find something true in there or not true, hopefully true. And all these slides will be on afterwards. It's going to be a bit dense, so I don't need to do that stuff. So what do we mean by advanced SQL? Well, usually what we mean, I think, is that like we're writing fairly normal SQL, but the fact that we're writing normal SQL is kind of advanced Rails. Maybe that's kind of what we mean, and that because we don't really do it very often, that if you came up in Rails or in other things that had a good ORM, then maybe writing raw SQL is not a comfy place for you. So we'll cover some of that tonight, and then we're going to breeze through into the weeds of some more stuff. So yeah, hopefully there'll be something for everyone along the way. Quick aside, if you don't know SQL, you should learn it, because honestly, it's probably the only thing I know that'll still be relevant when I retire. All of the other stuff will be gone, I think. So SQL, if you learned it in 92, yeah, all of that would still apply today. It has some things have changed since 92, not a ton though, but a lot more has changed in Linux and Ruby, let's say. And Active Record is kind of an abstraction for SQL, kind of, sort of, but not really. It's a pretty leaky one. I don't think that's a failure on Active Record's part. I think that's what they were kind of going for. So if you want to understand the ways why Active Record is weird, then understanding SQL will really help with that. So why do we think about raw SQL in Rails? Well, the number one reason, actually, I'll start with number 2 because it's easier to get out of the way. Depending on your sort of tech background, you may be used to writing raw SQL. Maybe you came up you know, in places that didn't have an ORM, or maybe you just prefer that, or you came from some other, or you've written a bunch of raw SQL, you're really comfortable with it, you prefer to think that way. Cool. Do it, then make it active records, then commit it. I think that's all we need to say about that. The main reason that we care about it is my controller is real slow, or actually what we mean is it was fine when I shipped it, and now we have, you know, 10x the number of rows in the table, and now everything's really sad. I'm allocating tons of RAM, and you know, it's taking too long, and the load balancer is timing me out, and all this sort of sadness. So that's where we start thinking about like, raw SQL. Okay, so before we get too excited, there's a reason we don't reach first, like as first thing, because they're integrating it with Rails or with anything. There's some stuff to know, not a ton of stuff. It's not like super difficult, but you do have to know it, and it is easy to go around. So I would probably describe it as a little bit treacherous. It's also, on balance, harder to maintain for the average Rails team. And that's not something you should just casually jump in, you know, chuck in there, because we'll see some raw SQL that I wrote less than a year ago, and you will see me not really quite understand what's going on there as we go through it in not great detail. So, look, it is what it is. It's a good tool, but it's not like magic. Right. Use active record. It's good. It helps you avoid a whole bunch of the problems that we're going to talk about that you're going to have to. What we're talking about here is taking the car out of automatic, putting it into manual, and then now we're responsible for clutches and gear changes and choosing which gear to, you know, on the hill start. We're going to be responsible for all of that. And that's going to give us a lot of flexibility and power, but also, you know, challenge problems. Active record is pretty great. Be naive, but not too naive. This is probably the number one thing I think I've seen mistaken me make and others make, is that you're like, okay, this works great now, but you kind of have to think about how it's going to be in 6 months to a year, like what's the data volumes like to grow, because what you're doing now may not work. So it's worth, and it's easy enough to test. Just load up your local dev database, a ton of rows, and run it. So usual stuff. If you're in a situation where I've written it in active record, it's now too slow, too memory, whatever, it's taking, you know, it's allocating all over the place. Heroku's giving me that red line thing, and everything's getting real sad. So the usual stuff, N+1 queries, are we doing those? Are we missing any indexes? What does explain say? If any of that is news to you, cool. Ignore every slide that comes after this. This is the important stuff, because raw SQL is what you reach to when you've done all that, and you're like, it still hasn't fixed it. But these are the kind of the meat and potatoes stuff of just, you know, making things faster, and you can get you can fix your problem without adding a maintainability problem with these things, whereas it's a little bit more marginal with raw SQL. So before we go further, we should talk a bit about explain, because there's explain is not part of the SQL standard, so it exists in all databases. Does everybody kind of know what I mean when I say explain? No shame in not knowing that. We all learned the point. Okay. Explain. Explain is you chuck the word explain in front of your query, and instead of running your query, the database will tell you what it would do to run your query, in terms of, I would read this many rows from this table and this many from this thing, and then I would join them together in this particular way to make another table, and then I would join, you know. And the output is fairly inscrutable, frankly. So it's going to take some time and examples to build your intuition on it, and you're not going to learn explain, you know, in the moment. Like, you're not going to, if you've never played a sport before, you're not going to learn the sport by just being in the middle of the most important game ever. So do have a play with explain beforehand. Unfortunately, the output is like totally different between databases. And there are some tools that can help you. Some of these are free, some of them are paid. Honestly, the paid stuff might be totally worth it. They kind of help break it down into things, help you understand it. And gotcha for explain is, oh dear, did not expect it to do that. Is that the size of your data in your tables changes the choices that Postgres query planner will make. Same with any other database. For example, if you have 10 rows in the database, it will probably not bother with the index because it'll be like, you know what, if the rows aren't huge, I'm just going to read these into memory. It'll just be quicker because I'll probably move them later anyway. If you have 10 million rows, it's going to make a different choice. So you can't do reliable explain running on your local dev environment unless you have a sanitized copy of production or you've built something with an equivalent size of data. Postgres uses stats from the database. It doesn't actually count the rows to decide stuff. That's what the vacuum stuff is all about. Whole different talk. But right, crack on. Explain, ask the planner what it would do. Explain, analyze, will run your query, and then ask the planner what it actually did. So explain, analyze is better output. You get more information. The explain output tells you, hey, here's some estimates of what I would do. And what the explain, analyze will actually tell you, like, yeah, I did this. I actually found X rows. Just a gotcha there is that it actually runs your query. So if you're explain analyzing an update, delete, or create, make sure you wrap it in a transaction. One other kind of tip here is to turn on buffers because buffers are a pretty good measure of work actually performed. Postgres's view of the world is 8 kilobyte buffers. That's what it thinks it has, that's what it thinks is on your disk. So it thinks in buffers. When you ask Postgres, hey, how many kilobytes did you read? It won't answer you. It will say, I read this many buffers. So, and buffer size is basically always 8K. So turning on buffers will tell you more stuff. It makes it a little bit more overwhelming, but it is, it's useful. And Postgres.fm is a good podcast, and they have links to people who know a lot more about Postgres than I do. Rails has sugar for explain, but I don't know. I never use it because it's a little bit kind of a trap. You call .explain, but it actually runs your query. It's kind of an analyze vibe, but Rails doesn't run it to do the analyze thing. It runs it because it might need, you might join queries together with active record, and yeah. So TLDR, like, don't just shove .explain against your destroy query to figure out what's going on. It's probably safer to call to SQL. You can call that on any active record expression, and then you can deal with it yourself. And that's probably a better move. Right, raw SQL. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. We don't write a ton of it, so we don't tend to have as developed tooling, which is fine, I think, basically, but there is some stuff out there. SQL Fluff seems fairly popular. I've used a bunch of them. They're all a little bit meh, to be honest. They don't really do they're not as strict as you would hope or as configurable as you would hope, but it's fine. Don't worry about it. Maybe if you're just writing a couple of queries, maybe you don't worry about it at all. GitLab have a pretty good style guide. It's full of sensible stuff. Honestly, just use that and skip the bike shed would be my recommendation. With queries, common table expressions is a way of breaking up your SQL query into kind of, I guess, sub-queries with names. So it would be like, conceptually, I guess they're like local variables in your function. And they are great. They are supported everywhere. And if you're doing anything complex with SQL, you should do it because they are like, I guess reading a long SQL query without them is like reading a Ruby method where someone has like really worked hard to avoid assigning any local variables. You're like, okay, that makes me sad, but whatever. There are a bunch of useful functions. Two I use all the time are coalesce, which is basically like, I guess you can think of it as like Ruby's fetch for hashes. Just like, give me the thing, and if the thing is null, give me the second thing. Really handy when you're building up a query and you want to set a default value. And you can put case statements. So select case, if it's this thing, do this other thing, whatever. It's a little ugly, but it gets the job done. The way to think, I believe the way to think about SQL is to think functional. You're going from mapping from tables to tables. Tables you start with are on disk, mostly. And then you build a bunch of in-memory tables, and then you cut them down, maybe with a where, and then you build it up with another join, and you get tables, 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 and what spits out is one table at the end. But they're all essentially pure functions of tables. So that's a pretty good mental model, I think. Okay, So you want to write raw SQL in Rails. How would you start? I would probably, because you're probably starting with an active record thing that's not doing what you hope it would do. So start with that. Call to SQL on it and put that into your editor or wherever you're going to write your SQL. Because active record does a pretty good job of, I don't know, just joining up, doing all of that stuff that you need to do to kind of, mechanical stuff to do joins and all that sort of business. And so I'd start there. And you can also obviously see SQL queries in the log file. What I find myself doing a lot is using Rails Runner. Rails Runner is amazing if you've never used it. Just lets you run shell scripts Ruby scripts in the context of your Rails app. So you can just Rails Runner my script. And it's a little bit like, I guess, like Rails console, but you save to a file and you get to kind of run it. It's really good for this sort of business where you're like figuring out, does this work? And then you can shove some timing stuff around, and you could do it all in console, but it's a little bit annoying, I think. So anyway, Rails Runner, I use them. I have about 10 of them in every Rails app I'm working on. Okay, so we've got a starting point. Now where do I store the SQL? So you have a couple of options. You can obviously put it as just inline string. It's probably where we all start. It's pretty sensible. You can pop it in a SQL file that you file.read in there at some point. Also fine. Lets your editor help you out with stuff. Or you can use the Scenic gem for database views. If you don't know what database views and materialized views are, you should go find out. You don't have to be an expert in them, but knowing that they exist can really, a thing will turn up in your career where they are exactly the right thing, and not using them will be really hard. So they're very easy. They're basically, it's just like a SQL query that Postgres hangs on to for you and then makes it look like a table, and then you can have an active record model that just thinks it's talking to a table. And a materialized view is like a cached version of that. So have a look at them if they're new to you. Scenic is, I think, probably the best way of managing that. So I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but it's totally an option. Like if you need to build a complex set of stuff together into a table and then do ad hoc queries on it, then Scenic is probably the way, View is probably the way to go. What I'm going to talk about tonight is more like, I have a report that's going to join everything, and then it's going to run, nightly, and I don't want it to crush the app. Okay, so writing SQL, great. How do we get our data values into it? Before we can talk about that, we're going to take a little detour to talk about the Postgres wire protocol. So the wire protocol is the thing that sits on top of TCP that exists between your Rails app, essentially the PG gem, and the database. That's what it exchanges messages. It's, it's a kind of a HTTP vibe kind of a thing. There's different messages, different kinds of stuff. And there's actually 3 flavors of it. The simple one is the one that has always existed. You just basically load everything into a string, send it to the database, get back your answer as result rows. It's probably what you think, your mental model of how it works. The extended one is a little bit newer, but it's been around. I forgot to put that down, but it's been around since Postgres 9 something, so 9.3. I can't remember, but it's been around for a long time. You're going to have it in your Postgres. This actually sends the SQL command and the bound parameters as separate messages. And that's really cool because SQL injection is impossible if the database gets the SQL command and the bound parameters as completely separate things. There's no world, barring a terrible bug in Postgres, that it could get confused and go, oh, this string is not someone's name. It has a, I'm just going to shove it into, and I'll turn it into SQL command. So where possible, we want to try and use the extended protocol. There's also the copy protocol. It's a thing we're not going to talk about. So extended protocol is great, and you just basically write your SQL, you put like $1, $2, and then you pass in your parameters. So how do you pass in your parameters? Well, actually, sorry, out of order. Again, surprise slides for me. What does Active Record do? Active Record is pretty good. It tries to use the extended protocol whenever it can, and you can tell when it's using it from its logging output, because it will give you this kind of, I've underlined it in yellow there, where it gives you the params that it passed as the separate message. So if you give Active Record stuff where it can easily tell which bits are data values and which bits are command, it will do so. But if you give it stuff like, basically if you're putting things in a string, it will go, I can't really do anything with that. I'm just going to escape it, and I'm going to use the simple protocol. So that's cool, and it's nice that you can tell which one is going on, because this will matter in your own queries, perhaps. If you want to go a little deeper, you can grab Wireshark and just have a look at what's going between your app and Postgres. Not something you're going to need every day, but sometimes when you need the truth, it can be a little bit helpful to be able to do this. It's pretty easy to do. Just start your Rails app with PGSSL mode equals disable, and then that's that. And I'll have a quick, I'm sharing a tab. Can't show you the Wireshark. That's fine. Wireshark, it's a thing. Maybe you don't need to care. Right. So we want to, let's do the thing where we interpolate the values into the SQL command. So we're going to use the simple protocol. How do we do that? Well, we can either just put the raw in string interpolation. Oh, sorry. No, we're going to start these. That first one is string interpolation, and the other option is to kind of try and send them separately. So I talked about the wire protocol because the wire protocol choice is reflected higher up in the API choices we're going to see in a minute. So I want you to kind of bear that in mind, that they're kind of like, one of them is looking at the simple wire protocol, and the other one was looking at the extended sub-protocol. Okay, I want to, this is probably what we mostly do. I want to just, I have some data, don't necessarily trust it. How do I sanitize it? Rails actually has a bunch of ways of doing it. There's more detail in the guide thing on GitHub, but honestly, this is probably the best one. It's got a weird name, but it's fine. It does the job, and it's cross-database as well, so you don't need to care about whether you're on Postgres or MySQL. I didn't mention it earlier. I forgot about it, but I'll quickly jump in now. That, in theory, one of the downsides of raw SQL is not being able to move databases later on. You're like, oh, I'm locked into Postgres. I've never moved an app. I would never recommend anyone move an app. And I can't think of any good reason why you would move from Postgres to MySQL or vice versa, if your app works. So I don't think that's a thing. Right, so this one's pretty straightforward. And this is going to use the simple protocol because we're essentially just building a big old string. We're going to send it to the database and it'll run it, and we hope that sanitized SQL array will save us. So the second approach, code's a little small, I apologize. All of this is in that GitHub repo, is to, we want to send our parameters separately from the SQL string. So whatever API we use we need to pass them in separately. So Active Record does have API for doing this. It is not well documented and kind of, I'd say semi-private. It's not private hidden, but it's not supported either. So it's kind of annoying to use. So you kind of build up, the bottom line is where the business happens here, is you call exec query, and we'll get into some of our choices about how to actually send SQL to the database later on. But you pass in your SQL string, and then you pass in query name, which just appears in the logs. You don't care about that. Then you pass in this array of binds, and the binds is an array of active record relation query attributes. So you give it some data value and a transform, and it kind of works. And then if you know that there's a bunch of, you can introspect this to get the types, and kind of it's faff, not going to lie, it's kind of faff, but in exchange for the faff, you get a lot of safety. Because where I've got August 2019 there, no matter how dangerous that is, that shouldn't trigger a SQL injection, because we're going to use the extended subprotocol. The other approach is to not use Active Record, but to use your underlying gem, and here's where we get to the Postgres specific. We're just going to pass in the parameters as strings and let the SQL query typecast them into whatever it needs them to be. Postgres is a programming language. All of the things you would expect to have, it just looks weird. So this is how you typecast. There's a bunch of ways to do casting, but first one I'm casting to an integer, and the second one I'm casting to a string. String, whatever. So you can do that. The reason that this is safe is because we're using exec params, which we will come to in a second, but exec params is a method on the PG gem, which does use the extended subprotocol. Yeah, also a little bit of faff, but in exchange for faff, we get safety. Which of these should you use? I don't know. To be honest, I have kind of leaned towards using the Postgres gem version, but in theory, the active record version is fine. It's just I got annoyed with it the last time I did it. So I don't know. If you end up having strong reckons or find out things about it, let me know. Both are fine, I think. Okay, so we've built our query. How do we run it? So a lot of details in this in the guides thing, but I'm going to just bring it down here. There's a ton of options. It's really kind of overwhelming when you're like, how do I run raw SQL in Rails? The one that we probably all reach for the most often is active record based connection execute. It doesn't support bound parameters, so you have to just kind of build everything as a string. So I don't love that about it, which is why I'm not recommending it. The other ones are fine. Find by SQL, select all. The reason I've kind of got some warnings on the memory efficiency there is that when you get data from the database, you get it in a PG result. And a PG result is this weird thing that has a block of C memory allocated, and it also has like a block on Ruby's heap allocated. And whenever you touch it, you're going to copy it out of the C memory into Ruby heap. It's fine. But then, like if you're using find by SQL, Rails will do a lot more with that. It will essentially take that array of hashes, which is what it'll get out, and then it'll build instances of active record objects and all of this stuff. So your memory, it's not like it's necessarily bad. It's just like a little bit more out of your control. It's just like how much allocation is happening for every, if I get 1 kilobyte of string from the database, how many allocations am I happening? Harder to say. So I think if you're in this business, you probably want to control allocations because this is the whole reason you signed up for this raw SQL monarchy. The return types, obviously an array of models is extremely convenient to work with. An active record result is a very thin wrapper around a PG result, probably also wraps around MySQL, but again, I don't care about database, being able to change database. PG result is totally fine to work with. You just get an array of hashes out of it, and that's often better. So of these 6 options, I kind of prefer these 2. And the difference between them is how you do the bound parameters stuff. So one of them uses the slightly undocumented active records API stuff, and the other one does the, you have to learn a bit more about SQL typecasting stuff. But they are all good. They do bound parameters, the safety, and honestly, the exec params one is probably the best because you've got the most control. It's going to do the least magical allocation of stuff for you. Like if you allocate with it, just click back to here it is. So you can see where I've got results equals PG result.2a. On that line, the stuff is being copied out of that C memory into Ruby memory. And there's no avoiding that, unfortunately, because we need to do something with it. But once that's done, no other magic is happening. So I can mutate results in place. I can, there's things I can do. I can control it. Whereas with the other one, it's a little bit harder. It's maybe more of a flavor thing rather than a strict thing. So cool. So I'm going to very briefly go through a couple of code files. These are going to be pretty dense, and I don't expect you to understand all of it. This is worked on this ages ago. It was an app running on Heroku. We generating a report from a bunch of data tables. The data tables grew a lot over time, and the job got out of hand. And it went from, we had the 14 gig Heroku instances. I don't know what they're called, but the ones that make me sad about how much they cost, down to one of the normal ones because turns out Postgres is real good at that sort of stuff. So, can I do this because I'm not sharing? Am I sharing? Am I sharing a window? Yes, I am. Great. So I need to share a different window. Bear with me. Thinking that a little bit. Okay, so this is an object that loads SQL from a .sql.erb file. You will see that I talked a lot about interpolation, and then I didn't do any of it. Because the only value we needed interpolating was the survey ID, which was not no come from the user. So I just used ERB. So reading that in, and excuse me, here's the business here. So in this instance, I'm using copy data, and I will see why in SQL. So this is tuned for generating report. I'm getting Postgres to build the entire CSV for me, and I'm just copying the CSV. So I'm not copying rows from the database, I'm copying a big string that is the CSV, and then I'm putting it into the response, because that was all I needed to do. So this uses the copy subprotocol, passing my query, some other stuff, and then while row. So this, I guess, a rule of thumb for, hey, I need to be careful about performance and allocations here, is that it should probably look kind of like transliterated C code. So like, don't map stuff. Map will generate copies of things. You kind of want to while loop your way around it. Like, pretend you're writing C, and that'll probably get you on a good start towards like, okay, I'm gonna control my allocations. So okay, let's look at the query, because this is, I don't think there's anything that's interesting here. Okay, big old query. So starting with a copy, and then I have a bunch of with statements. So the outer bit, can you do this? Not easily. So this is the SQL copy statement. If I go to the bottom, you can see that I'm copying to standard out with format CSV, headers true, encoding, whatever, all that sort of business. So Postgres is building the whole CSV for me, because I didn't even want to do that in Rubyland, because there's quite a lot of data here. I have a lot of comments because this stuff is hard to remember. So this is a with query. So I'm building up essentially a local variable table here. So with, assigning this name to this here. So I'm joining a bunch of stuff together. You can see I'm using a case statement to control the output of that table. And then I am creating another local variable called decorated surveys, which again is mostly just the contents of the surveys table, but I am coalescing. So give me the, this is active storage stuff, or sometimes it's representation, sometimes it's blob. So I want to get, give me the first one of these that's true. And then I am, sorry, that, and then I'm selecting. So these are I'm using my local variables here in my final select. So again, a whole lot of coalesce. I'm caring about the name of the columns, because that's going to be my CSV output. Again, case when else. Chakar, so converting a Postgres date to a string. Bunch of joins and okay. So there's a lot in that, a lot of detail, but that's the gist of it. Like, coalesce and case statements get you a lot of the way. With will help keep it sane, and that, I think, is probably close to me being done. Give me 1 second. Let me see one more slide. Okay. Well, that was a lot of work for just questions, wasn't it? Thank you very much, everybody.
Can I ask you a question? I showed it a little bit late, but did you mention RL? And can you think of a time where using RL tables is a good idea?
Yeah, so the question was, did I talk about ARL and when is using ARL a good idea? I think ARL is pretty good. I can never think in ARL. Like when I write ARL, I have to write SQL and then walk it back into ARL. And that's sometimes a pretty good move. I did kind of maybe obliquely mention this at the beginning where like use Active Record if you can use Active Record, and I would count ARL in that. That like ARL will help with a lot of stuff. Active Record has recently, I don't know if it's maybe only in master, but like common table expressions, so the with stuff is doable in Active Record now. So maybe solve your problem in raw SQL and see if you can rewrite it back into. I think that's totally fine. I don't know if ARL is more readable than raw SQL. That's a kind of a maybe. Like it's just kind of different. So yeah, I guess it kind of depends on, and it doesn't necessarily give you the control over allocations and stuff which you would have by going down to the Postgres layer. So yeah, if it works for you, cool, awesome. But I guess there's probably a layer where it won't work.
Just a quick question for me. You mentioned you dropped the app from sort of 14 gig to 100 meg system. Was what you just showed us the solution for before you had this problem? Could you just talk a little bit about what the situation was before that, like what the inefficiency was?
It's quite a lot of exports in this app. So there was a parent export class that was doing stuff and specialized in child classes, and there was just a whole lot of string allocation mapping was happening basically. All of each of those individual tables, a whole lot of stuff being transferred from Postgres to Ruby, and then Ruby was doing a whole lot of work on it. And Ruby will allocate what it needs to allocate. And Ruby, when it takes it from the operating system, will not give it back. So you won't. Although maybe that's a little bit less true. It's less true with JMalloc and anyway, it depends on what malloc settings you're using, but roughly speaking, Ruby's quite bad at giving it back because it's like, I might need it again in the future. So yeah, it's just a whole lot of, like, if you throw enough strings in there and you map across them enough times, and it wasn't really obvious because it was across a bunch of code. So yeah. It's a good point though. There would have been ways to improve that without going to raw SQL. We're just in a big hurry and everything was falling over. So like we didn't necessarily feel like we had time to stop along the way. So yeah.
I know you didn't want to talk about too much about views, but whenever I do raw SQL, I go straight for view. I'm not that. That's my preferred solution. Why would you choose raw SQL over views?
I mean, I guess we're talking. So the question was, when would you choose raw SQL over views? I guess we're talking about where you store your raw SQL, because like views are raw SQL as well. I don't think that's a bad approach. I think it can maybe be a bit, I don't know, it's probably more of what your team feels is like where you like to keep stuff. Do you need a whole gem and a whole thing if it's, if this is the one monster report that you need to do? If if you have 50 of those reports, or like views are good, like I think, like they're good to use. They're like, I've only mentioned it very briefly at the beginning, but like the bit here where I hope to solve my Rails performance problem without creating a new database performance problem, because essentially we're moving work around here, and the hope, with our fingers crossed, that Postgres is going to be better at it. Then like it's better to do it in C in Postgres than copy it into Ruby and do it all there. I mean, not maybe. Like if it's often it works out because we don't have like thousands of people getting reports at the same time. But like if you've got a lot of people hitting it, then there's that issue. So yeah, I think views is totally fine. I think it comes down to maybe just a choice for the team. They are, I guess, when you have a view, you're then left with a choice maybe about, do I put a model in front of it, or I'm going to get like real active records objects out of it, which might be a lot, or but me like doing the raw SQL thing on a view might be like a really practical move. So you do you, I think, is the TLDR. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
My turn. All right, see if I can share something here. A whole window, why not? It's working. Awesome. Welcome to Wellrailed. Hi, my name is Elspeth. I'm head of software engineering here at Flick. And today I'll be talking about a little bit about Flick, a little bit about engineering metrics, and segueing nicely into the developer experience. These are some cartoon us's, which may or may not be based on real Flick employees. It was alluded to, I don't know. There are some people I don't recognize there. Flick is an electricity retailer, but also a platform for selling electricity. And this is our vibe: activists for change, deliberately on the customer side, putting Kiwis in charge of their power, the conscious choice, and challenging ourselves to disrupt. So that's our brand platform. And what does it do? I like to talk about the Flick platform because this is definitely like our neck of the woods in tech. And it's a platform to sell electricity to New Zealanders currently, so theoretically could do more. The whole prospect experience, customer experience, but also retailer experience of managing customers. And some tricks the platforms learned along the way include wholesale prices for customers, so paying the spot price, achieving nationwide peak and off-peak prices, nice like simple plans that are easy to like understand and read about, bill smoothers, solar buyback, so you can sell power to the grid, a best plan promise. Yeah, there's a bunch of things. So these are the things that our platform can do. But what I'm really here to talk about today, oh yeah, no, I did promise to tell you more about the platform. Here's some icons. I probably should have arranged them in a way that kind of created some kind of pyramid or layer, but you get the gist from all of this. This is what we work with a lot. Ruby and Rails, DORA technology, AWS under the hood. We've got like a little corner there for what we've been using for our customer experience, which is like React, Contentful, GraphQL, Gatsby, and then a lot of our like tooling that we use for Circle CI for deployments, Rollbar for error reporting, and Datadog for our logs. And there's a little Android app and an Apple app in there as well. I put Salesforce there. We do integrate with it. It's a very light integration. No Salesforce developers here. So DORA metrics. So when I started here, I'm like, I think we're quite good at doing this development thing. I think our processes are fairly good. We're deploying all the time. I'd love to know more. I'd love to know about the parts that we do best and where we could focus some more and create tooling to solve problems that create any lags or like frustrations that developers might be experiencing. So I looked into it. I believed that some experts would have thought about this before me, and they had. And probably the best thing I found was DORA metrics. So, oh, I should know this acronym. DevOps, research, something, beginning with A. Yeah, so it's a framework of performance metrics that help DevOps teams understand how effectively they develop, deliver, and maintain software. And I was quite impressed by kind of the holistic view of it all. It wasn't real dry. There's lots of good relatable stuff in there as well. I'm just going to flick to, this is just a little PDF of like all the kind of aspects that have gone into their thinking about what helps teams work effectively and happily. And I recommend having a wee peruse, because I mean, it talks about, you know, less burnout, and I was like, this is good. This is not some kind of like man-machine metaphor where we tune out code, and the more like a robot we are, the better. And yeah, here's the website as well. The DORA research program. State of DevOps research program. I still don't know what the A stands for. Am I missing something? I don't know. Assessment. Thank you. Teamwork. Cool. All right. So this is what the experts think. 4 metrics to track that will assess the performance of your team's tools and processes. And here they are. And of course, there's only 4, so they're going to be very high level, but I'll walk you through them. So the first one is lead time for changes. So this is how long it takes a commit to get into production, which I did misinterpret for about 9 months. Yeah, which I'll explain in the next slide. But it's an important metric because conceptually it's like the shorter the lead time, the more quickly the team is like building something, getting feedback, modifying, improving, and shipping and delivering that value. And DORA has like bars set, benchmarks to aim for, and elite is considered less than 1 hour. High is between a day and a week, so that's really broad. Like, to me, I feel like everywhere I've ever worked lived in that high area, and it's so broad. It's like, gosh, I want there to be more levels in between, but okay. Then there's medium, 1 month to 6 months, and low is more than 6 months, and I was like, wow, it's a long time for a commit to make it to production.
Is there a gap between 1 week and 1 month?
There sure is. I know. I like things to be clear, and like you are in some kind of liminal space if you're in there. You don't belong anywhere. I don't know.
Is it talking about a commit when it's written or when it's been like approved?
It's as soon as you've committed it locally, and then it's done when it's in the production, the main branch.
That
Yeah.
includes code review.
Yeah, yeah. This is where I got confusing, because this might kind of expand on this. Like, well, what do we mean here? So confusing. Lead time is kind of from manufacturing time, so it's like a request arrives and there's all the stuff and then it gets done, and that's lead time. Cycle time is like a story gets picked up and started, and then when it's been done, like that's the cycle time. And then there's lead time for changes, which is the DORA one. And I got so confused between lead time and lead time for changes. Like, Googling is hard when they're so similar, but that is commit to deployed. So yeah, with that, we'll just pop over here. Okay, well, we'll start with cycle time. So these are not real metrics, but this is a real dashboard that is actually integrated with Jira and GitHub and various things. So I'll start with cycle time because that's what I started measuring by mistake, thinking it's lead time for changes. So I didn't want to delete it. It's the time in working hours to go from tasks to go from in progress to done. So we're using Jira here. So this is someone dragging into the in progress column. I say working hours because it's like we all sleep and we're not actually working 24 hours. And it just felt funny about someone starting a task at 4:30 p.m. and then finishing at 9:30 a.m. and it counting as like 13 hours. So I used this like little gem that was quite easy to use called working hours, I think. And yeah, you just kind of configure what they are, and like, you know, when people start in the morning, you can put a lunch break in, you can exclude holidays. So it's just quite handy if you've ever got a situation like this. Yeah, and DORA has no opinion on cycle time and what's elite. So because it's not an engineering metric, it's way more around like process, and it's less driven by DevOps related matters. So, but I was measuring it, so there it is. And we've been measuring things by team for a long time, which I love the idea of, you know, one team, we're all in this together, our metrics are all as one, but at the same time, it kind of obscures things. So like if one squad is like, we're going to try this thing for a few weeks, because in our retro, we're like, it could be better if we did it a different way. They can still get the vibe of whether it felt like it made a difference, but they don't have the metrics, and they're just going to get like washed out with whatever every other kind of chaotic squad is doing. They're not going to see it. Yeah, I know. Andy, don't be shocked. Chaos everywhere. But yeah, they're not going to see it. So we haven't actually been tracking squad by squad, because I really wanted these metrics to be for people like developers and squads to own. It's not an oversight tool, it's a learning tool. So it's taken me a while to figure it out, but I think I've got there. And the idea is that everybody will have access to this dashboard, and you'll be able to see the team as a whole, and you'll be able to see your own squad, and then you can see yourself. But if you don't want to, I can like make it so you don't have to see that either. So hypothetically, here's squad X, which is not a real squad, but you might look at this and be like, cycle time is quite high in July. What happened there? Like, what was there, some kind of event? Is that the impact of a bug? Is it because somebody went on holiday or someone new started? Who knows? So it's quite useful to have it broken down by squad, and each one could be quite different. But then actually in this case, July the 18th was pretty bad all round except for this squad. So that might tell you something about what's affecting cycle time. But we're here to talk about lead time for changes, which is the actual DORA metric. So this is the one with like the commits making it to production. So I thought about it and I was like, okay, so I could store like timestamps of every commit on every branch and then track whenever they make it to the main branch, and I could do the diff, and that's the correct way to calculate this. I was like, but I mean, wouldn't it average out if there were like 4 commits and then you made a PR, and like that PR, like that's kind of the lead time of like, this is ready now and let's go. And I was like, I feel like that'd be similar. So to start with, that's what I've done. But of course, I'm going to go and check my work and like do the commit thing. But it was just like quite a lot more effort to get there. So what I've started with is the moment a pull request is ready for review, the timer starts. And as soon as it is merged, the timer stops. I use the working hours thing, holidays not included. And you can have a little like marker to show what those DORA benchmarks are. So elite is an hour, so it's really not much at all. High is up to that point. And in this hypothetical team of many developers, they may have had some kind of hiccup, or maybe there was just like one thing that got merged that 2-week period, because you can change the resolution too. What happened there? Yeah, it was definitely just 1 week. Like it could be just one thing got merged that, and it took 271 working hours, and you don't know, it's not showing you volume because it's not about like the size of the pipe or whatever, the number of developers. It's about how quickly we're turning things around. The likelihood of if it takes a long time to merge something in, that there'll be conflicts and things will become stale. It's more efficient to be making small and frequent changes. So so it's not showing the full picture, but in general, in this hypothetical team, they're doing well. They're on like the elite side of high, I'd say. So that's quite good. Target, low. You can change the time. Used OptoKit. Has anyone ever integrated with GitHub using Ruby? OptoKit was quite easy, very pain-free. Highly recommend. Okay. Any questions so far? I'm just kind of like going, go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a definition of what they mean by
Commit. That's a good question. I mean, I just went and interpreted it as soon as you not add but make a commit. in any branch. You don't have to have pushed it up. But I could be wrong. I didn't question it. What do you think?
I think there must be something formal because there's stuff like rebasing and stuff and all that
I know.
going on.
That's why I was hesitant to go down that route, because I'm a rebaser and a squasher and a merger. Like, I reorganize my commits all the time. So I'm like, there'll be all these lost ones surely, but you can easily kind of mess with metrics by doing that. And you create one commit that's actually a bunch of commits, and then push that up, and all of that time between each of those commits is gone. So I don't know, the way you work and the way you code will affect these metrics.
Also, your kind of like your source code repository might have a different concept. Not everyone uses Git.
Yeah.
Almost.
I remember using SVN, but I don't remember much else, like, other than that. It was a long time ago. Yeah. So say you found that the lead time for changes wasn't like amazing, or it was a bit inconsistent, and you wondered how to improve. These are like the kind of things that DORA recommend looking at. So you want your teams to be independent. Like, ideally, if you've got one team that does like a function like front end and another that does back end, and suddenly they're creating dependencies and they can't be like all like free radical and just get things done together. So ideally your team has like a domain, a focus, and they're able to independently ship code as a team, and that has made like a huge impact in terms of the way teams work with the more full stack approach. So that's what DORA recommend. Really engaged cross-functional teams, like having testers is totally fine, and sign-off is totally fair. People might want to try things on, UAT before you give them to like the administrators of your, company to work with. So, but the most important thing is everyone's engaged in working together and committed to getting things done. Efficient, well-understood processes, good communication, empowered teams with like minimal approval and sign off and stage gating kind of things. Singular focuses for team members, so not like fanning out and having 5 things in progress and eventually they all land, but the average time is the same, but they all land like, they all take 1 day rather than a day, like 2 hours each or something along those lines. Ease of testing, the speed of your CI/CD pipelines, how responsive the team is with code review, how quickly they get onto that stuff, and also having really stable teams that know their domain, and once they get started, it's like quick, it turns around. So these are all like there's way more probably. These are just things I thought of, but that's lead time for changes. Next metric, how am I doing for time? Okay, I can go a little faster. Deployment frequency is what you think it is. How many times you deploy to production today? Just the one. Elite is multiple deployments today, every day, and I was like, wow, that's not as hard to achieve as the last one. But I don't know, am I missing something? Yeah, I think we can do that. High is a deployment per week to per month. Like, I don't know. Am I reading this wrong? I don't understand. So let's go have a look at how a dashboard could look. Where was I? I was here. All right, deployment frequency. So the target, high, more is good. So high is down there, elite is there, and this is like way up there. So you'd look at this and you'd be like, there's a little bit of a pattern to this team. Like, it seems like there are times where there's a lot of deployments and not so much. You'd probably want to look into that. You're analyzing this, but this would be an example of this is probably a metric that's already quite good, and you probably don't need to dig into so much for this hypothetical squad with randomized data. And also squad specific, I think, is really useful. Like in this world, let's see, these ones, they're just like hovering right on elite, whereas, yeah, that squad's similar, but kind of more variance. Yeah. Deployment frequency. I don't know, am I wrong? Like, is 1 deployment per day a low bar? Or am I living in a mystical land where it's like unusually easy to deploy to production?
All like things are diminishing return with the number of clients that. Sorry, 100.
Mm.
I mean, if you declare your cache how many times a day, that's the point. So I think the target isn't necessarily high. It's somewhere where you should not be doing
Mm. Yeah, so like 1 is a good target, but like there's no need to do 50.
Yeah, it depends on the size of the organization, perhaps, but perhaps you could bundle in features into what was one version.
Mm. That's another great point, because lead time for changes, it doesn't matter how many devs you have, it's about that average time. Whereas this, it's like more devs, more deployments, probably. I mean, it might go like that, but yeah, it's kind of oddly.
The orgs I've worked with where this has been really slow is kind of when stuff leaves the technical sphere, it has to get like sign off, like the cab. Well, actually, they only meet on Tuesdays, and so yeah, and we have an urgent bug fix, and it's Wednesday. Yeah, but the cab is there to reduce risk, so they only meet on Tuesdays. So I think it's a nudge to like get that stuff sorted, because there's a lot of well-meaning but deeply ineffective stuff that happens in order to manage risk that involves slowing deployment down.
Yeah.
I think that's where they're writing this report, or it's just like, slowing down does not make it like less risky. It's the opposite. It's weird. We know that we have seats.
Yeah, that's very true.
The other one's probably firmware, and it was very different deployment patterns.
Oh yeah.
20 different versions and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've been living in a bubble this whole time. Okay, so a few ideas there. Small, clear, independent user stories. I think I'm focusing it on the things that like we could do, like I could envisage us to do to make us even faster. But ease of speed and deployment, more developers would increase it too. But yeah, you're right. I think that is probably the thing that would tip the scales the most, is like not having any kind of stage gates that to prevent progress moving forward. So the next one is mean time to recovery. So it's conceptually, problem happens, how long does it take to solve it? So recovering from a disruption or a failure, and a lead is like less than an hour, high is less than a day, and so forth. This is actually really hard for me to measure in an automated way. I've had a few, oh no, I didn't write any data there, but I've been thinking about it, and it's hard to figure out how to do it well without it being manual, like actually linking like a service desk. That's how we track our errors, like internally and from customer complaints, like actually tracking those and linking them, and trying to figure out when the problem actually started and when it was resolved. Like it's not as simple as Git and Jira. And also like recovery, what might that mean? Because it's not like a service has necessarily gone down. Maybe it's just someone's complaining because you put a spelling mistake in a form or something like that. So, and like for us, our biggest issues when it comes to recovering is our integrations with external services and then becoming unavailable, and then the service that needs that external service being asked a lot of questions, and then slowly a circuit breaker opening, which is a concept that we have at Flick. That means that that service who is integrated with an external service is just like, I'm not responding until things are sorted out, and there's just like lots of errors all around. So it's one that I am looking to measure, but am not currently measuring. But things that would help it if you were trying to improve would be automated kind of uptime monitoring, proactive alerts. If there are issues, we have things like that in our tech that I'll go through soon. Quality of service is a priority. Like culturally, it's important. Like a lot of places, it's like, yeah, it's more important we get this thing shipped than you deal with that problem over there, and externalities and pressures. So it's a cultural thing on like how important is it to resolve certain issues. Having low complexity in your code bases means you're going to recover faster because you're more likely to be able to find the problem. And great debugging tools, fast CI/CD pipelines, Last metric, also have not built it. Change failure rate, also hard. Rollbar has a way of suspecting a deploy when an error is new and novel, and so it's like we think it's this deploy, but usually it's just whenever the code near that error most recently changed, and it's nothing to do with like what really caused it, which is something way further down the pipeline, especially in a microservices environment. I think that the only way this would be resolved is if someone was really manually like, here's an issue, that's when it started. So that's one example of a change failure. But most of our errors are not due to code changes, but more like unusual states to find yourself in when you're in an eventual consistency microservice environment, which is probably another talk. How to measure hard. Yeah, I haven't even finished the bullet points. How to improve. I know code review, manual testing, automated tests, integration tests, production-like test environments, quality. Have the metrics made a difference? With a lot of them, it's like we're confirming we're doing quite well. It was good at identifying the impact of our ways of working. So like in our real metrics, there's this wave for a lot of our metrics between like good and bad, which is aligned with when we have our big room planning sessions where we do like 3 monthly planning sessions. So it's like around that time, everything grinds to a halt and people leave their PRs open and there's just like not many deployments. And it's entirely like, yeah, I can see why. So it taught us we related a few things. Not so good. Measuring the team as a whole wasn't great, so that squad breakdown became more evidently important. The way we use our tools affects the metrics, like how promptly do you move a Jira story to done when it's done? Like, is it right away? Is it after lunch? You know, how important is this information to you? And how the ways that you're using our tools affecting things. And are we committed to improving them? For some of them, it was like, well, the lead time for changes is pretty good. Like, you know, is it going to make a world of difference? Are we spending time on the right things versus the wrong things? The amount of time might not be the problem, but instead what the time is taken up by, like whether it's like awkward deployment methods or whether it's, you know, thinking, refactoring and being really careful and considerate as you write your code. So, and we didn't have all the metrics. We only have half. And we have other metrics too, which I'll go through. I feel like we're getting quite late now, but this is what's next for developer metrics. Make it accessible, be able to drill down, integrate with more things, look at them more frequently, and timeline events that impact metrics. Remind ourselves of the past. It's so easy to forget. These are just some metrics which are put in that performance and efficiency category, like value, that you're even building the right thing. I don't even try and measure that. We have product managers for that. Morale, incredibly important. It impacts all of this. So we're just measuring like one small part that is measurable and why not, but it is a tiny piece in the whole scheme of things. We measure all these other things as well, but they're not DORA metrics. And I really like that concept where if you just keep building new things, you'll end up just working on unplanned work and interruptions and bugs and managing complexity. I think it's a really powerful message that I appreciate. And we have a team that is dedicated to the developer experience. And that's how we can prioritize and make sure that our tooling is really good. And our CI/CD pipelines work and there's consistency across our platform. And we can help teams achieve what they're looking to do with kind of like a support team around their tooling. And they do a bunch of stuff. Like, I'm not even going to read it all out. And it's not heaps of us, but because this platform's been built from the beginning, very developer first, we just had a lot of it already, and now we're looking after it, and we're adding to it, and we're enhancing it. Yeah, so that's our developer experience team, who are kind of the most invested in these metrics and improving them. Yeah, and these are some cool things they've done. Again, I think probably people would like some pizza, and I'll share these slides. Yeah, questions?
Okay. The DO, DevOps, right? all of us are DevOps people, actually, or a few of us, maybe it's like, is there any kind of like information about kind of like the difference here? Is the DORA thing appropriate for all engineering teams, or is there some kind of like tweaks you can do for everyone else?
Yeah, I think DORA has been focused on the modern kind of troubles of scaling software. It's come from a different place. Like metrics started out like how long has it been since the last incident, and the longer the better. And now it's like, no, we can make little, you know, errors along the way as long as we fix them quickly and keep moving forward. That's better. And so there's a lot of like, it's very focused on. It's driven. I think Google even sponsored the DORA research. So that's like really the crowd. It's very much focused on web, and it's very much focused on large teams. So I'd say that's kind of the area where it'd probably apply the most to. Yeah, I don't know. Anyone else want to comment?
When did DORA come out? Or
I think 2021 they put out a report, but I think before that it was 2019. So it's quite recent. It was like 8 years of research across hundreds of, no, it was like 30,000 developers that were spoken to, many organizations. There's like a really big, research piece, and they've just published the results, and I'm just like trying them out. So it's been quite interesting being able to be on the receiving end of someone doing all that work.
I've used the report a couple of times for when I'm facing a cab or a client with a set of practices where, like, you know, a lot of it has been focused on slow things down so we can, we can make sure that we've checked everything before we release stuff. And it's nice to be able to kind of point it and go, no, it's not just like my records. Here's a huge PDF of like why this is wrong. And you need to let me push the security patches through. And it's really, really useful for that, because kind of appeal to authority things. Like, people see the fancy names at the top of Google and stuff, and they're like, oh, that's good.
it's interesting because it sounds like it kind of encourages this cycle that I've seen before of like ship something and then like fix it. So, and if it's weighting all of the commits the same, then that's going to look really good. If you like ship something that almost works and then you like fix it quickly, rather than ship something perfect every time. Like that wouldn't maybe show up very well in DORA.
No. And like, I don't know if anyone's worked somewhere, it's kind of a thing like committing straight to the main branch, you know, and then everyone get together and reviews together when you've done a good chunk of work. Like they DORA-wise would be elite. And I'm like, do you want us all to do that? I don't know. I think it very much depends on, what you're doing, the risks in the software that people are relying on, and finding like your agreed middle ground, and maybe going for consistency over like endless improvement.
On one of the slides there at the end, you had other tools that you use, anonymous feedback. Can you give a really short summary?
Oh, yeah. Yes. We have a regular kind of pulse check, and my pulse check is focused around, have you received in the last 2 weeks some positive feedback, some constructive feedback, and have you yourself given some feedback? And it's just a yes, no. So it's kind of just checking in, like you do see patterns, like everyone says that they're giving feedback, but also that they're not getting feedback. It's like, is everyone giving that one person feedback? Because it seems like if that's the case, it's the only rational explanation, but like it also shows when everybody is like doing a really great job, and when it's gone a bit quiet and you have to kind of give people that nudge of like, remember to let people know if they've done a great job, and so it's mostly focused on ensuring that it's happening, and it's like a regular, it's not this huge thing kind of way.
We also do the health checks.
Yes, we also do proper health checks. So like this feedback metric is is this regular small thing, but yeah, we do quarterly health checks, and we do kind of do a deep dive into is it at Spotify? The Spotify health check. Yeah. Yoink. Thank you. Okay. Hi. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so we're just gonna have a little Q&A section, but like no pressure to ask lots of questions or anything. But if you're interested in anything about Flick or its tech stack, like this is a good time. I've also got a couple of experts in the room to help me out here and there. So yeah, if you is there anything anyone wanted to know about Flick, our tech, the way we work?
Oh, there was one thing.
Yeah.
Just at the very start.
Mhm.
The symbol.
All the symbols.
And then there was a Google one.
Google.
What was the Google thing for?
Yeah, it's like weirdly entrenched in what we do. Like technically our platform is not really integrated per se with Google, although soon you'll be able to authenticate using Google to sign in. But it's more around the aspect of our platform that's around data and insights, and also what we do organizationally. It's very Google centric. So I put it there because as devs, you just kind of do encounter and use its tools a lot. So if I'm being honest about what technology Flick uses, I just felt like Google is actually a big part of it. It is. Yeah.
I have a non-tech question.
Mm-hmm.
What is your realistic view of the changes you want out of the energy market that you'll actually get? Possibly not the answer, but controversial as well. It's a massive problem. I know we had a petition last year, and I just wonder what happened with that because the system seems right.
Yeah, it certainly does. And like from a technological perspective, it's about enabling whatever we can do outside of tech world to give the fairest price for our customers, which sometimes that's going to be the wholesale market and sometimes it's not. And that's where like the rest of the business kind of comes in, and like you say, the lobbying that we've been doing. Josh actually probably knows a lot more about this than I do, CTO. I don't want to throw you in like, did you want to comment?
Well, so in the moment, I think the major clearinghouse that might have independence buying through access to ACX is actually kind of going. Things are so kind of crazy at the moment because we're not going to keep on doing this. So that's actually the biggest problem in the last 2 weeks. But it's a whole series of it's been messy for a while now. And regulation the regulators don't really have teeth. So that's the problem, and they haven't really been empowered to regulate properly, and there's sort of some conflicts of interest since they sort of work for the people that also own the company, the big generators, which is also the government, which is also you because you're KiwiSaver. So it's like it's a really pretty tangled mess.
Do you think there's any chance of what happened in the UK with small energy retailers getting it coming in?
I think it already has. It's the same thing in a lot of markets right now. And it's all to do with the same reasons too, right? Like oil prices.
Thanks.
Thanks, Josh.
I've got a harder question. Climate change.
Oh yeah.
All right. So what's Flick doing about burning fossil fuels?
Well, I mean, we have the carbon neutral stamp company wide, but I mean, essentially we're trying to give people the information they need to make good decisions, because it's not about shaming people, it's about enabling people. So we have tools around what the emissions are like in New Zealand right now, so you can decide if you want to turn on your washing machine or your dryer based on it being low emissions because it's all hydro energy versus when the coal is going at Huntley. Yeah, and so it's mostly around tracking, and we definitely have aspirations to grow in that space because conscious consumers are that's that's who we identify with, and that's like our audience, and we want to like build it more in that area. But yeah, so far it's more like, here's the honest answer to like what your impact is in terms of your electricity use, in presenting the information. But we definitely want to do better than that.
So I'm too small brain to deal with any big questions. You all have a bunch of services that talk to each other. Could you maybe talk about like some of the good times, bad times you've had with that, things you've done that have worked out, like you're like, yep, that was really cool, or things, ways you split stuff up, you're like, that seemed like it's going to be great at the time, and then didn't turn out to be, or things you might do differently if you could wave a magic wand, that sort of stuff. We all have stuff that like to do differently, so I don't think it's. But yeah, you've got some concrete experience there, which I'm interested to hear about.
So who's worked in a like microservices kind of architecture before? Like just to get a vibe for the room, like kind of like a third. Yeah. So microservices have some really great aspects to them. So I was talking about team topologies earlier, and like how teams can kind of independently deliver value and not kind of need heaps of like cross pollination of like different resources. And microservices are kind of great for that, because you can actually say a squad is interested in a whole domain area, and they might be like looking after the administrative tools so that we can look after our customers, and then there's like people who are looking after the customers themselves, and you can do that to the extent where it's like these code bases are just for the squad. and it really reduces like the surface area of how much you have to know to be able to operate in systems, because you're starting with like a smaller surface area for them to get to know really well. And I think microservices are great for that. They're also really great in terms of the little things, just like, your CI/CD pipeline doesn't take very long. You don't have to wait for the test to run for your whole monolith to deploy something. Like it feels quite good, like making a change, and it's like we get a couple of minutes and it's done. So like those kinds of things are really good. It definitely forces you to think quite hard about separation of concerns, what services are responsible for, give them a bit of a mantra, tell yourself, like the service is responsible for doing that, it doesn't do this, and trying not to like shoehorn in too much into an area it doesn't belong. So it's like it demands that you architect things quite considerately, but the downside is it's a lot harder a lot of the time, and there are lots of operations that take information from like a bunch of different services, and they've all got their own databases, and they're meant to talk via API. They can't just like reach over and grab data. So every now and then there's something that takes like mass coordination, and next thing you know, you've got like a chain of messages going from one service to the other, each adding more information to the last until it finally makes it to the end of the pipeline. And the person who initiated the action by submitting a form and being like, I want to send emails to everyone in the Orion network, can't be told how many people just got sent an email, because you've no idea, because it gets figured out further down the line. Like things like that are tough. I think it impacts administrative users probably the most, about unconclusive outcomes and eventual consistency, and things kind of getting a bit out of sync, like an action happening, someone signing up, and one service is like, someone signed up, I'm making a user, and another one's like, cool, I'll make their contract. And then the last one is like, I'll set up their like billing entity, but that fails, but these services don't know that. And then they expect that to be there later. And so there's lots of complexity it introduces that asynchronous communications just come with. But I mean, I've really enjoyed it. It's been quite a new thing for me. So it's been 3 years now, but I hadn't worked with microservices before. And I'd say if you love writing APIs and using APIs, then it's a good place for you. If you like to have like access to any data in the database and that kind of convenience, it's not so great. Any other comments, like other people in the room? yeah, also work at Flick.
Mm.
We've I missed something real key.
So, yeah, there's definitely like sometimes you got to, you know, there's some best practices you got to make sure you follow by. Like we've got some services that are putting really specific information onto a queue for another service, and they're like really tightly linked. And we've since not done that. You've kind of got a few lessons of the past you got to live with. Dead messages was an important thing, like stuff running in queues. I assume that would be the same in a monolith, but like
Any kind of
what you're talking
asynchronous.
about when you're creating a new account, something's might fail, and that thing's going to fail individually, and you just need to make sure that you're keeping track of what is failing individually so you can fix it up. So you got to make sure you've got certain like practices in place that maybe you wouldn't need to worry so much about if it was all sort of synchronous in a monolith.
Yeah, but I do feel pretty fancy when like you're doing something and it's like a lot of processing and it's mostly one service and you're like, I'm just going to scale up the number of workers in that environment. And you're like, it's processing double time. Awesome. I feel great. But, and you know, that's cool because in microservices you can just like, you know, fan out. But, you know, it comes a downside because then there's another service that gets overwhelmed because it has an external integration. It doesn't like it when you scale other things up too much. So yeah, it's got its pros and its cons for sure. I enjoy it. I'm like keen on continuing to get better at it and like learn from others and keep doing it for a while.
I think for the most part we've been lucky that things have broken down pretty logically.
Yeah.
I know that sometimes you can be dealt a bad hand with microservices and people have gone overboard. But yeah, most of the time, they kind of like a lot of like people in that like intermediate developer and beyond, like it can be kind of a hard place to learn initially, but then it's quite exciting because like it's all, you know, it's all a lot of stuff going on for better or for worse. So it can be kind of fun.
Yeah, I've got any questions from people in the room? I've got a couple that were sent through in advance.
I've got one, which is, how's GraphQL looking up? Is it good?
I mean, I think it was pretty cool. I quite enjoyed it. The only thing that has been hard about GraphQL is actually more to do with the contentful GraphQL integration in the schemas being kind of like figured out on the fly. So it's like a contentful Gatsby, you know, it's the contentful Gatsby SQL triad that's a little bit presented problems when if you let it work out the schema on the fly, then it doesn't think various entities exist unless there's actually instances of them in like the contentful database. So I found like disappearing schema was really challenging. We ended up making a static one that we have to maintain. We're like, we insist you remember that notifications do exist. No, there are no published ones, but they do exist. So so there are a few challenges there, but I mean, ultimately, I think it's pretty cool. I learned it at quite a superficial level, like working with it, but Dan's worked with it much more than me now, and Paul Prestige here, he's worked in the same kind of area too. I had a fun time with it. I can't imagine, how it works interacting with like Postgres databases and that kind of thing. But like, Optimal know all about that, right? Yeah, very little experience really. Anyone have a better answer?
I mean, it's been fun, right? Like we built the thing, we rolled it out. We haven't really had to like do any like emergency maintenance.
That is true.
There are some gotchas with that particular combination of technologies where at one point we had the front page of the main marketing site was taking like 5 seconds to load or something. We've been uploading like 20 megabyte images, and then it turned out that it wasn't 20 megabyte images, and it was actually a link type that was recursively like building a tree of references for the other page, and then it would get back to itself and build another tree of references until the data file that it used to say here is what this page is composed of was about 50 megabytes or something. And so we figured that out and got it back down to like whether it was like half a meg or a meg or whatever it is. But yeah, there's some interesting gotchas like that with the combination of technologies.
Yeah, it all goes so well and then it gets hard and then it goes well again, and but it's like still new. It still falls into that category of new where I'm not quite like fully trusting and confident in it. But it's been going well. I think we'll keep using it. Someone asked about SaaS providers, and it's mostly in-house at this point. I think the last one is invoice.com. We use for basically mastering the balances of customer invoices in their balance, like whether they're in credit or not. Other than that, it's basically all. Am I missing anything?
We use Salesforce, which is
yeah.
we're seeing data there and we don't touch it anymore. And
Yeah.
it gives our customer experience team a place to put notes and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a newer one. Marketing Cloud. That's about all though. Like we have a construct in our minds that's the platform, and like Salesforce kind of falls outside of it, but maybe it shouldn't. It's like, where's the line where the thing that our tech team looks after begins and ends? It gets a bit blurry at times. I don't know if anyone else has experienced that.
Because we have to own Salesforce, we have to do things with Salesforce.
Cool. Yeah. And maybe this is a good time to mention that there are some jobs. If anyone is interested, we've got some lead developer positions, and there's like quite a few varieties of them, but the job is up on Seek, and we're kind of looking in the area of practice leads, people who like the idea of a technical roadmap rather than like a feature roadmap, like getting consistency across the platform and having technical aspirations of what technologies we want to adopt and retire, and then there's another area that's more around people and growing people and coaching and like using kind of frameworks to build like learning plans and that kind of thing. And the last one is actually quite a unique one. I think it's like a half-time contract role to role share in our DevOps squad, which is developer experience, which is kind of what I was talking about with the metrics. They're there to help developers and help build tools that will make them happier and more productive and better observability. And we're just looking for someone around half-time for maybe like 6 months to co-lead with Cash, who is with us at the moment. And great team doing really cool stuff. So if you know anyone who that sounds like who wants to like dip their toe in and not be full-time, it'd be really cool. Cool. Yeah, anyone else have some? Job openings, official.
Any other comments?
Ackama?
Ackama's very
Highly recommend. I worked there.
It's we're a services company, so you want to work across a whole bunch of code bases in a year and not have to work them together, thankfully. If you've not worked in services, it's pretty fun and different. You get to see a lot of different code bases. It's a pretty good learning experience. You get to see a lot of what works and doesn't work, and inherit some of it. We are long viewing in terms of the absolute great. Nice people, the best work. I think you have we're looking for all levels basically. Maybe even junior at the moment. So we're looking for all levels. If you have any questions, hit me up.
Cool.
Address Finder is looking for an intermediate dev as well. We've officially closed the ad on Seek, but we haven't had a huge number of applicants. So if you know an intermediate dev, we are a product company. We work with our sister company, Tech, which is a consultancy company. I saw the little Address Finder logo.
Oh yeah. We use Address Finder. Yeah, it's great. Really like Matt Ramsey. He's excellent to work with.
But yeah, we have it's a cool little product, and it's a nice team. Seems like it's quite a lot smaller than Flick. But yeah, it's a really nice team to work with.
How big is the team?
We have at the moment 4 devs. That's it, and the rest is product. Yeah. So in total, I think we're not working.
Cool.
I work for an Australian company called Avato. So me and do It's a fully remote company. They hire people in Australia, New Zealand, States. I think one of our team just joined clients, Ackama. They've built sort of danced around companies in the last few years. We're looking for a lead engineer at the moment, I think, amongst a bunch of other titles. They're really confident in this work. And the Phil one is
Let's recommend each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Let's see, is anyone not spoken? Cool. I don't want to skip. Is there a next slide for this situation?
Yeah,
Yes.
this one's more just about upcoming meetups. So I guess this has all been part of like a series of meetups that go through a few different Wellington companies. So obviously we had Optimal last month and Flick today, and I guess we're talking about Address Finder, that's next month. So yeah, that'll be hopefully announced in the next few weeks probably, but you can actually RSVP to it already, RSVP to it. So yeah, just plugging that one. Other than that, I think that's really everything. Like, thank you to Flick. That's been really good to get all the pizzas and all the drinks that were at the event and everything. And thank you all for coming. Unless you have anything else.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a wrap. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.